Imagine a notorious outlaw hunted across 3 territories, suddenly wedding a wealthy 68-year-old stagecoach owner to dodge the noose. Sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly what happens when Colton West, back against the wall, marries Marietta Ashworth in a desperate bid for safety. Unbeknownst to him, she's hiding lethal secrets of her own secrets that could rival his darkest deeds. With bounty hunters closing in and old adversaries lurking, each day becomes a battle of wits and sheer nerve to stay alive. Their unlikely alliance teeters on a razor's edge. Is it a marriage of salvation or a doorway to even more danger? Intrigued, you won't want to miss how this tale unfolds, or the startling revelations that bind these two unlikely partners. Stay with us to witness every twist and betrayal, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, heartfelt stories like this one. Your support keeps these tales coming. In the summer of 1879, in the rugged outskirts of the Montana Territory, a drifter named Colton West trudged along a dusty road with nothing but a threadbare coat and a gnawing hunger. 32 years old, but looking a decade beyond. He carried the weight of too many poor decisions on his prematurely lined face. Every so often, he slid his left hand beneath his coat to touch the revolver at his hip, as though checking a lifeline. A reward poster, one that promised a handsome bounty in 3 separate regions, made him the subject of casual gossip in small towns and a genuine prize for any bounty hunter with a good aim. Despite the danger, Colton had nowhere else to go. He was nearly out of bullets, and the last of his dry jerky had vanished days ago. Desperate times, he thought, called for any solution he could scrounge. Late that afternoon, he followed a winding trail into Copper Run, a settlement that appeared more prosperous than the usual frontier outposts. Fresh paint adorned a few buildings, and the noise of commerce drifted through the main avenue. Merchants hustled between wagons stacked with goods, and a stagecoach rumbled down the center of town. Horses, snorting in the haze, Colton planned to keep his head low. After all, he had no desire to catch the eye of a sheriff or wandering bounty man. But the enticing smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery gnawed at his stomach, and the clinking of coins leaving a saloon reminded him he had fewer than $4 to his name. As he considered how to stretch his meager funds, a commotion pulled his gaze toward the offices of the Ashworth stage line, an imposing brick structure that seemed too refined for a frontier town. A stagecoach driver stood on the boardwalk, raising his voice in protest at a woman who, despite her advanced years and petite stature, rebuffed him with a sharp retort. Dressed in a sober black gown that covered her from neck to wrist, the silver-haired woman was clearly Marietta Ashworth, the 68-year-old owner of the largest stage line in that part of Montana. Her posture suggested authority. Her gaze swept over the men around her as though she could dismiss them all with a snap of her fingers. From what Colton could glean, the driver was complaining about wages hours and the peril of road agents prowling the trails between Copper Run and the next territory. But Marietta Ashworth's response was as unyielding as her posture. "My schedules hold," she said firmly, her voice carrying a crisp clarity. "If you or anyone else finds it unsuitable, feel free to seek employment with less exacting standards." The driver cowed, stepped back. Men half her age seemed reluctant to push her further. Colton watched intrigued. A woman running a stage line of this size was a rarity, especially one who commanded such a presence. He found himself thinking it might be worth asking for work, anything to secure a steady meal. Not that he had many options, but stable pay and a bunk were better than cowering in abandoned barns, always afraid a lawman might kick down the door. With a swift glance over his shoulder to confirm no one was reaching for a wanted poster, Colton followed the woman into the building that bore her family name. The interior was as organized and crisp as she seemed to be, with wooden counters, neatly stacked papers, and a tall clock that ticked with methodical precision. The clerk behind the main counter, a tense-looking fellow in his 20s, barely concealed his suspicion as Colton approached. "Help you?" asked the clerk, arms crossed. He wore a frock coat and string tie, and his gaze flicked to Colton's ragged clothing with clear disapproval. "Looking for a job," Colton replied, managing a polite tone. "Heard there might be openings for anyone who knows horses and can handle a firearm." Before the clerk could refuse him outright, Marietta Ashworth appeared from the back office. She assessed Colton with a discerning, icy stare, one that made him feel as though she could read every secret he harbored. For a moment, he thought he saw recognition in her eyes, but it vanished before he could be certain. "What skills do you have?" she demanded. Colton cleared his throat. "I've scouted a fair bit through rough country. I can shoot straight, handle a team of horses, and I'm not afraid of bandits." Her eyes narrowed as though she found that last line mildly amusing. Then with a curt nod toward her clerk, she said, "Mr. West, is it? Fill out the necessary paperwork. We're short on guards for the Fort Randall route. Report for duty at dawn. Be punctual." And just like that, fate gave Colton West a foothold in Copper Run. Whether it was luck or deeper machination, he didn't know. He simply offered a low thank you, aware that the critical gaze of both Marietta and her clerk followed him as he took the offered forms and turned toward the desk. Little did he realize that this moment, desperate yet hopeful, would be the simplest part of his entire relationship with the formidable widow who owned Copper Run's stage line. The following morning, Colton West found himself perched atop a stagecoach bound for Fort Randall, shotgun in hand, the company's crest emblazoned on the new coat he'd been provided. The coat felt stiff and foreign, but it fit well enough, and it offered a semblance of legitimacy he sorely needed. Beside him sat Silas Doyle, a veteran guard who answered questions with grunts and had eyes that rarely blinked. Their cargo comprised barrels of ammunition, a strongbox rumored to hold silver currency, and two modestly dressed passengers who had boarded at first light. Colton took in the jagged hills and thick pines that hemmed the trail. Though the dawn was mild, each breath tasted of dust, and the dryness caught in his throat. He tried to focus on the scenery, rather than the constant itch that reminded him at any moment someone might recognize him as the outlaw, described on a half-dozen reward posters. But the tension of the territory soon eclipsed those fears. The driver guided the horses slowly, as if expecting an ambush around every bend. Dust coated their boots, and the sky, though wide and brilliant, felt more oppressive than freeing. Midway through the journey, the trouble arrived. Rounding a curve in a narrow pass, they encountered a large tree trunk, lying squarely across the road, an obstacle too conveniently placed to be mere chance. Silas's mouth twitched in a snarl. "It's a setup," he muttered, cocking his rifle. No sooner had the words left his mouth than shots rang out from a rocky ledge overhead. One bullet ripped into the coach's wooden frame, missing Colton by inches. Another found Silas's chest, knocking him back with a grunt that turned to a choking gasp. Colton leapt off the seat, landing behind a boulder for cover. The driver cursed, trying to rein the horses around, but the path was too tight. From behind cover, Colton fired back into the rocks, the blast from his shotgun echoing in the pass. He glimpsed a bandit tumble from a high perch after a lucky hit. Yet the outlaws had the advantage of elevation, and bullets peppered the stage's sides. The two passengers inside screamed their panic, fueling the horses' attempts to bolt. Colton shouted for them to stay low. He risked a glance towards Silas, who lay pale and gasping, blood staining his coat. The older guard's eyes flickered, and he lifted a trembling hand, as if trying to warn Colton of the next volley. A bullet sparked against the rock near Colton's head, forcing him to duck. Running out of shells, he signaled the driver to push the team forward. The half-panicked animals managed to drag the coach in a screeching arc, snapping the harness in places, but finding just enough purchase to break free of the ambush site. Another outlaw took aim from behind a stunted pine, but Colton's final shotgun blast knocked him aside. With no more ammunition, Colton sprinted, grasped a handle on the back of the rattling coach, and hauled himself aboard as shots whizzed past. Silas and one passenger lay behind, either dead or dying, though Colton had no chance to confirm. His heart hammered. Another bullet clipped the corner of the stage's roof, showering him with splinters. Then miraculously, they were out of range. The stage thundered down the twisting road, spooked horses galloping at breakneck pace. Colton clung desperately, expecting at any moment to be unseated. By the time they reached safer ground, the ambushers had given up. The wounded passenger inside moaned in terror, while the driver trembled so hard he struggled to keep the reins steady. Colton's arms ached, a grazing burn stung his left side, and his lungs still smelled of burnt gunpowder. But they had escaped. They limped back to Copper Run in the late afternoon, battered and short, 2 lives. A crowd gathered outside the Ashworth stage line offices. As the damaged coach drew to a stop, Andrew, the tall, stern clerk, hastened to help the surviving passenger, who was hysterical with fear. Marietta Ashworth appeared on the porch. Without a word, she observed Colton's torn sleeve, the bullet hole in the stage's paneling, and the terrified expressions of driver and passenger alike. "What happened?" she demanded in a low, calm voice. Between ragged breaths, the driver recounted the ambush, pointing to Colton as the man responsible for their narrow escape. Marietta's gaze flickered to where Colton stood, leaning against the bullet-riddled frame, panting from exertion. And that stinging wound. Her scrutiny was intense, but not unkind. "You're injured," she said flatly. "Not seriously," Colton replied, still trying to catch his breath. She nodded, then barked orders for the local doctor to see to him. The crowd parted, impressed and uneasy. Colton couldn't help but think he'd just proven his worth to Marietta Ashworth and potentially singled himself out even more. But for a man on the run, impressing a powerful widow might be a far better gamble than disappearing, hungry into the wilderness again. During the next 2 weeks, Colton's role at the Ashworth stage line became indispensable. He reorganized guard schedules, identified ambush-prone areas on the maps, and trained newer guards on how to respond swiftly. Observers noticed how well he handled firearms, but more significantly how he carried himself, like someone accustomed to living on the edge. Some whispered that he'd been in the cavalry. Others speculated about a checkered past. Only Marietta Ashworth's tacit approval kept the rumors from snowballing into full-blown accusations. Late one evening after a grueling day of training recruits, Colton was walking alone when a dark carriage with the stage line crest pulled up beside him. The window slid down, revealing Marietta. "Get in," she commanded, her voice neutral. He hesitated, hands straying toward the revolver beneath his coat. She merely raised an eyebrow. "If I wanted you dead, Mr. West, I'd have arranged it more discreetly." He climbed inside. The driver flicked the reins and the carriage lurched forward. Marietta, draped in a heavy shawl, studied him under the lamp's glow. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "You're quite the sharpshooter, Colton West. Though it's curious you've never mentioned serving in any official capacity." He swallowed hard. "I learned the hard way, ma'am. Not in uniform." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "Tell me, do you recall a bounty posted for a certain Colton West wanted across the territory lines for armed robberies and a suspected murder?" A cold shiver raked his spine. By reflex, his hand dropped toward his gun. She gave a slight shake of her head. "My driver is armed," she remarked calmly, "and I've survived more dangerous men than you. So let's not do anything foolish, shall we?" His stomach clenched. "How long have you known?" She turned to gaze out the window, the lamplight exposing her lined features. "Since the day I hired you, I keep informed about who passes through Copper Run. Those who interest me, I research thoroughly. Then why not turn me in for the bounty?" Her lips curved in something akin to a half-smile. "Because you're more valuable to me alive. My stage line needs security and you've proven adept. Besides, I have no desire to share the law's attention for my own reasons. Let's just say handing you over is the least profitable option." Colton frowned, uncertain if profitable referred to money or some deeper plan. "What's this all about?" She folded her hands in her lap, in arrangement. "Mr. West, I require a certain type of protection beyond the usual hired guns. Men fear you. A wanted outlaw is a powerful deterrent provided I keep you under my roof." He tensed. "You're blackmailing me." Her gaze locked onto his. "I prefer the term mutual benefit. Continue working for me and you enjoy a comfortable life free of bounty hunters. If you decline, well, let's just say the local marshal would find your presence most compelling." Colton clenched his jaw. After a moment, he forced a nod. "Seems I don't have many choices." "None that end well if you're wise," she regarded him thoughtfully. "There is, however, one more condition." His fist tightened. "Another condition?" She paused, then said simply, "Marry me." Stunned silence engulfed the carriage's interior. He stared, unsure if he had misheard. She was 68, he was in his early 30s. The proposition was absurd. "I'm not sure," he began. Marietta let out a measured breath. "Let me clarify, Mr. West. I do not seek romance. This is business. I am an older widow. An unmarried woman is vulnerable. But as my legal husband, you would confer a degree of social acceptance and protection. A man with your reputation, in turn, gains the respectability of my name and a shield from prying eyes." He almost laughed from the sheer strangeness. A shield from the law by marrying a respectable stage line owner. She raised an eyebrow. "Under Montana territorial laws, the testimony of a spouse is complicated. Local society, though it may whisper, tends not to delve too deeply if I present you as my chosen companion. We protect each other, that's the offer." Colton drew in a slow breath. "And if I refuse," her voice chilled, "I hand you to the authorities tomorrow." He pressed his back against the carriage seat, mind spinning. The entire scenario reeked of desperation on both sides. "But it was also a lifeline, I guess." He said quietly, "We're getting married then." Marietta nodded as though finalizing a contract. "You'll see, it's hardly any different from what we do now. Just more official. And together we may fend off all those who'd threaten our little arrangement." As the carriage rattled along Copper Run's dimly lit streets, Colton West realized he'd never felt such stark relief and apprehension in equal measure. He was to marry a powerful widow who knew his identity as an outlaw and apparently needed him for secrets of her own. 3 days later, Colton West stood in Marietta Ashworth's parlor, newly polished boots pinching his feet, a borrowed suit hugging too tightly across his shoulders, wishing he could vanish. The ceremony was brief. The mayor's bored expression suggested he viewed the union as little more than a curiosity, and the handful of witnesses. Marietta's clerk Andrew, a stern-faced doctor, and a pair of business associates looked on with varying degrees of confusion. One associate whispered to another, "Why would she marry him?" but was hushed by the ring of the vow. Marietta wore a subdued gray dress with no veil, her silver hair pinned back. There was no talk of love, no exchanging of endearing words, only a swift recitation of the required legal statements. When the mayor pronounced them husband and wife, nobody suggested they seal it with a kiss. Colton exhaled. He felt that if he tried to kiss her, she might recoil or arch an eyebrow so sharply that it would cut him in half afterward. In the hush that followed, Marietta nodded politely at her guests. "I thank you all for bearing witness," she said in her crisp voice. "Refreshments have been arranged in the next room, but let's keep the toasts to a minimum. Business resumes tomorrow." The guests drifted away, sipping watered-down champagne, while the mayor mumbled congratulations. Colton lingered near a side table stacked with finger foods, uncertain of his place. Among these polished townsfolk, Andrew the clerk approached him with a look that mixed hostility and jealousy. "Just remember," Andrew muttered under his breath, "I've known Mrs. Ashworth for years. If you so much as steal a copper penny from her, I'll see you strung up. I don't know what game you're running, but I won't let you ruin her." Colton mustered a thin smile. "No game. We both get what we need." Andrew's glare hardened. Before he could retort, Marietta swept by, hooking her arm through Colton's, to whisk him toward a stiff circle of guests who insisted on congratulating the newlyweds. "You mustn't mind, Andrew," she murmured. "He's fiercely protective of the stage line." "And you," Colton added, her eyes flickered, betraying little. "He means well, but he confuses loyalty to the company with loyalty to me." Soon everyone had trooped out except for the doctor, who gave Colton's arm a cursory glance. He still bore a bandaged graze from that ambush and pronounced him on the men. Marietta directed the servants to tidy up, then faced Colton in the now empty parlor. "Come," she said, leading him up a wide staircase. "You'll have separate quarters in the east wing. Mrs. Yates, my housekeeper, has prepared it." The east wing turned out to be nearly as large as a modest home. Ornate carpets ran down the hallway, and tall windows overlooked a manicured garden. Mrs. Yates, a woman of late middle age with a perpetual scowl, opened the door to a suite. "This is yours," she said curtly, her tone implying she found the arrangement ludicrous. "See, you keep it in good order." Inside was a sumptuous bedroom, complete with a connected study and private bath. Colton gingerly ran his fingers over polished furniture, a bed with fresh linens, even a small fireplace. He had never slept in a room so fine. A large window let in the evening glow, casting shadows across the patterned rug. Marietta lingered in the doorway. "We shall take our meals together primarily for appearance's sake," she said. "Beyond that, you'd maintain your duties with the stage line and keep my name safe from gossip. In return, you have my protection, and I ensure no one hunts you down." He turned. "I can live with that," but she lifted her chin. "Breakfast is at 7. I detest lateness." Then she pivoted and walked out, leaving him in a swirl of uneasy silence. For a long minute, he stood uncertain whether to follow. But the footfalls of her departing steps seemed to emphasize the fact that their so-called marriage was more transaction than partnership. As he changed out of the stiff suit, Colton thought back to the vow he'd just made, a vow repeated without emotion, lacking the usual exchange of rings or sentimental words. He sank onto the edge of the bed, mind swirling. He was safe from the law for now. She was safe from predatory suitors or potential blackmail, maybe. Yet something in her gaze had suggested that there was far more beneath the surface. Her courtesy, while polite, seemed calculating. He wondered how many secrets she kept hidden behind that icy exterior. And so the night concluded quietly in a massive, unfamiliar bed. Colton lay staring at the ceiling, fully aware that his new wife, twice his age and thrice as formidable, was just down the hall in her private suite, possibly smiling at how expertly she'd cornered him into this arrangement. Or perhaps not smiling at all. Perhaps Marietta Ashworth never truly smiled. He closed his eyes, letting fatigue drag him down. This was the beginning of an alliance built on necessity, with neither illusions of love nor illusions of safety. And yet in his precarious life, it was more stability than he'd had in years. Winter swept over Copper Run with fierce winds and drifts of snow that piled against fence lines and carriage wheels. Cold nights drove the stage line's operations into a state of increased caution. Roads became icy death traps. Timetables stretched, and the risk of robbery did not diminish. If anything, hungry outlaws and desperate road agents saw supply wagons as prime targets, no matter the weather. Colton West busied himself training men to handle frosty night runs and scouted alternative routes. Yet in the hush of swirling snow, each day seemed to settle deeper into the brittle routine he and Marietta Ashworth had forged. They shared polite, minimal conversations at supper. Always at the long mahogany table, one at each end, she inquired about the stage line's security. He answered with succinct updates. Occasionally, she asked whether any suspicious characters had been sniffing around. He would nod or shake his head, then both would lapse into silence over the clatter of silverware. After the meal, she retreated to her study. He holed up in his suite or strolled the corridors, restlessness gnawing at him. Despite the mansion's grand design, he felt perpetually caged. One blizzardy evening, seeking distraction, Colton decided to explore the upper floors. Passing through a seldom used hallway, he noticed a narrow staircase leading up to the attic. The door wasn't locked. At the top, he found a dimly lit space crammed with furniture draped in sheets, trunks, and dusty crates. The rafters creaked in the wind, and beams of moonlight cut through gaps in the eaves. He trod carefully amid old rocking chairs and battered desks. Toward the far wall, he spotted a locked cabinet made of dark walnut that seemed oddly out of place among the other neglected items. Nearby, a large trunk bore initials that weren't M, but MK. Curiosity flickered. If she had a different name before Ashworth, what might this trunk hold? With a skill he rarely used since turning fugitive, Colton drew a small metal pick from his belt. It took only a moment to release the trunk's simple lock. Inside, he found carefully folded dresses of an outdated style. Beneath them lay a stack of journals tied with a ribbon. Each was labeled by year one, read 1859. The next 1860. The handwriting on the spines was neat but familiar. He'd seen Marietta's penmanship on the stage line's logbooks, though the name scrawled across these covers read Marietta Knox. She'd apparently been someone else in a previous life. Guilt gnawed at him. Rifling through her private papers was a breach of trust, even if their marriage was hardly built on love. But the compulsion to know overcame his hesitation. He slipped one journal free. The first pages recounted travels in California, references to covert acquisitions, sums of money, and a mention of eliminations that chilled him. Robberies, ambushes, talk of hidden partners. The entries hinted at a ring of bandit activity so orchestrated that it made his own crimes look haphazard. The name Reginald Powell appeared alongside details of a large-scale operation. Another note referenced Winslow and Conroy as if they were enforcers or lieutenants. His blood went cold. This was more than a youthful indiscretion. Marietta Ashworth, if that was even her real name, had been part of organized, ruthless crimes, possibly at a scale that rivaled any band of outlaws in the West. He turned a page that spelled out an ambush on a wealthy merchant caravan. The ledger of stolen goods. A dispassionate mention that loose ends were disposed of. She wrote it as though describing household chores. Footsteps suddenly echoed from below. The attic door creaked open, and in stepped Mrs. Yates, the housekeeper. Her eyes widened at the sight of Colton crouched over an open trunk. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, voice tight with anger. He rose slowly, the journal still in his hand. I was just intruding on Mrs. Ashworth's private affairs, that's what she hissed. Close that this instant, have you no shame? Despite her fiery tone, she didn't immediately snatch the journal from him, which told Colton she was weighing her next move. He set the volume down, though he still stood near the trunk. "Care to explain these?" he asked in a low voice. "Because it looks like the woman I married has a past far darker than mine." "You know nothing," Mrs. Yates said, stepping forward. Her stoic face twisted with concern. "And you do well to keep it that way. Mrs. Ashworth has good reason for what she's done." He couldn't suppress a humorless laugh. "Killing merchants. Coordinating robberies. That's reason enough for a gallows in any territory." Mrs. Yates's jaw clenched. "She built her life here from ashes. If you think you're in a position to judge, you're mistaken. Now put that journal back, lock the trunk, and walk away. If you value your arrangement, that is." Colton studied the housekeeper's determined expression. Plainly, she had known for years. Slowly, he returned the journal to the trunk, though every instinct screamed at him that he'd just uncovered a massive secret. one that could overshadow even the bounty on his own head. She's not who she claims to be, he murmured. She is Marietta Ashworth now. Mrs. Yates snapped, owner of the largest stage line in this territory, a woman who employs you and keeps you out of prison. If you want to keep it that way, shut this door behind you and speak no further of it. He pressed his lips together. In truth, he had no desire to blow up his deal with Marietta. He needed her protection, but he also couldn't pretend he hadn't seen the diaries. Fine, he said, at last relocking the trunk with a click, but if she's harboring a past as bloodied as mine, I'd like some honesty. Mrs. Yates gave him a final glare. Ask her directly if you must, but don't expect gratitude for prying into things buried long ago. Without another word, she ushered him back down the stairs. As he stepped into the corridor, he glanced at the locked door behind him. Mind racing. He'd found out that the older woman who married him for show was once part of a violent underworld. The question loomed, did she seek a quiet life, or was her empire in Copper Run merely a front for something ongoing? With snow flurries drifting past the windows, Colton realized that his position had just grown more precarious. If Marietta discovered his snooping, there might be a price to pay. By the next afternoon, word reached Colton that Marietta had taken a carriage into town after receiving a telegram. Mrs. Yates's glower over breakfast warned him not to mention the attic incident. So he busied himself in making rounds at the stage office, but he could scarcely focus. Mind replaying the lines he'd read about Reginald Powell, Winslow, and Conroy Plus, references to planned robberies in far-off places. Evening came, bringing Marietta's return. She swept into the foyer in a swirl of cold air and tension. Andrew and Mrs. Yates conferred with her in hushed tones, but Colton was too far to catch details. Then, as if sensing his gaze, she beckoned him into her study. He followed, pulse quickening. Closing the heavy door, she turned, arms folded. You've been exploring the attic, she said quietly. So Mrs. Yates told her, or maybe Marietta was simply that perceptive. He exhaled. Yes, found some old diaries. Learned your real name might not be Ashworth. Learned you once had a more notorious line of work than stagecoach management. Her expression was calm, though a muscle in her jaw twitched. I see you've discovered a fraction of my history. I was going to share it in due course, but your impatience forced the matter. A harsh laugh rose in his throat. You talk as though you're my teacher in a business school. This is about murder, theft, and conspiracies. She walked to her desk, removing her gloves, one finger at a time. It's about survival. My life before Copper Run was complicated. I had a partner named Reginald Powell, among others. They specialized in acquisitions. I planned routes, identified targets, and occasionally orchestrated removals. He frowned. You use me for protection from lawmen, but it seems you've got more reason to hide than I do. Precisely, she said, voice level. We each carry a price on our heads, though mine might be hidden behind a veneer of respectability. The telegram I received earlier concerns certain men who've been asking questions about an old colleague named Harrison Walters, once an enforcer for Powell. Harrison was released from prison months ago, and apparently he's tracked me here. Colton tensed, recalling the diary's references to harsh measures and unsettled debts. Why is he after you? Marietta's gaze hardened, because he believes I owe him a share of what I've built. The stage line, the land, my fortune. He's trying to blackmail me, threatening to reveal my true past if I don't pay or otherwise accommodate him. And you thought marrying a dangerous outlaw would scare him off? In part, she acknowledged, if I present a united front with someone equally ruthless, it complicates his leverage. But Harrison is cunning, and he's not alone. Men like him rarely operate solo. They might try to coerce me into dividing my empire. A bullet might be simpler, but that invites law investigations. I'd rather avoid. Colton rubbed his temples. You want me to handle them? I'm not asking you to kill on my behalf unless it becomes necessary, she clarified, voice chilling. But I expect loyalty, Mr. West. You're in this as deeply as I am. He thought of the diary's lines about ambush, cold-blooded murder. And if I say no, she narrowed her eyes. That's a question you need to answer carefully, because the last man who tried to betray me never had the chance to do it again. Silence stretched, charged with tension. Colton swallowed. He realized he'd stepped into a viper's nest. Indeed, he had come to Copper Run for safety. Now he was entangled in something bigger. But he also recognized a glint of desperation in her, behind her bravado. Marietta had reason to fear these old associates. All right, he said, squaring his shoulders. I'll stand with you for both our sakes, but if it comes to blood, we do it clean. I'm not a butcher. Nor am I, she replied, though the diaries told a more complex story. We deal with threats as necessary. Let's hope intimidation suffices. That night he found it impossible to sleep. He paced his suite, mind tangling with the knowledge that he was partnering with a woman who'd orchestrated large-scale crimes yet seemed almost respectable in day-to-day life. Perhaps ironically, he felt more kinship now than before. She had sins enough to rival his, and she was strong enough to hold off the world if he stood by her side. Come dawn, rumors flew across Copper Run. Two men had arrived at the local hotel asking discreet questions about Marietta Ashworth. The synchronicity was undeniable. They would want answers about Harrison Walters or about the fortune they believed she owed them. Colton's gut told him the confrontation would escalate quickly. He recalled the final line in one diary. Eliminations must be swift. The words reverberated through him like an omen. By forming an alliance with her, he'd pinned himself to a path of no return. Whether that path ended in success or in a noose, neither he nor Marietta could yet predict. Two strangers indeed set up shop at the Copper Run Hotel. They introduced themselves as Winslow and Conroy, claiming to represent investors in Stagecoach expansion. Andrew, with characteristic suspicion, came to the Ashworth estate to relay every snippet of conversation he'd gleaned. They were asking about your background, Mrs. Ashworth, he said, eyeing Colton warily. They dropped the name Harrison Walters. Sounded more like blackmailers than businessmen. Marietta dismissed Andrew to handle routine tasks, then turned to Colton and Winslow, and Conroy were once on Powell's payroll. They served as enforcers collecting debts, eliminating obstacles. If they're here, they know about Harrison's trip. Possibly they suspect we engineered his disappearance. Colton frowned. Did you? She gave a tight nod. Harrison forced my hand. I had men loyal to me intercept him before he reached Copper Run a few weeks ago. He never made it back to his associates. Now Winslow and Conroy are sniffing around to learn the truth. So we're dealing with two men convinced you're behind Harrison's death. They'll want payment or revenge. Precisely, she replied. If they prove intractable, they'll meet the same fate, but we must be careful. Two vanishing so close might attract the territory marshal's suspicion. We need a strategy that keeps us clean. They decided to invite Winslow and Conroy for a formal meeting at the estate. Let them posture, threaten, or cajole. Meanwhile, Colton prepared contingencies, including stationing a loyal groundskeeper near the stables with a rifle and ensuring the interior staff were absent from critical areas. The tension was palpable as Mrs. Yates oversaw the arrangement of furniture in the drawing room, removing breakables and ensuring lines of sight remained clear. Late morning, the duo arrived. Winslow was tall, almost genteel in his manner, wearing an expensive vest and polished shoes. Conroy had a brutish physique, hands calloused with scars along his knuckles. Their eyes darted around, taking in the grand foyer. The hush of the corridors, the swirl of footsteps from the servants, Marietta dressed in austere black, greeted them with all the warmth of a frigid wind. Gentlemen, she said, guiding them to a small parlor. This is my husband, Colton West. She allowed the introduction to hang in the air. The men exchanged a look. Both knew that name from wanted posters. A flicker of recognition passed across Winslow's face as though reassessing the balance of power. Conroy smirked. You've made interesting choices in consorts, Mrs. Ashworth. Conroy murmured. But we're not here to discuss your personal affairs. Colton offered no handshake, only a curt nod. He stood beside Marietta, arms folded, letting them see the revolver at his side. State your business, he said evenly. Winslow produced a folded letter from his jacket, waving it like a token. Our mutual friend Harrison Walters was supposed to meet us with certain remittances. He vanished. We suspect you might know why. Marietta's eyes gleamed. Harrison arrived, demanded a share of my stage line, threatened blackmail. He left empty-handed. If he died on the road, that's hardly my fault. The territory is dangerous. Conroy took a menacing step forward. We believe you orchestrated his death. You owe restitution for what you gained from his demise. Colton's hand strayed near his holster, but Marietta laid a subtle touch on his arm, signaling restraint. Restitution, she repeated, a mocking lilt in her voice. What precisely do you believe I owe you? Winslow's smirk turned predatory. All we ask is a modest share of your profits. We'll convey it to certain parties back west to make sure no one else comes calling. Marietta let out a short, scornful laugh. Blackmail, then? Straight to the point. You prefer a euphemism, Conroy retorted, crossing his thick arms. Call it a private agreement. Silence gathered. Colton sensed the tension coiling like a snake ready to strike. He saw in Marietta's posture the same steely resolve she'd shown commanding her drivers. No private agreement, she said. Harrison tried that. His path ended in a snowy gorge. Are you keen on sharing it? Winslow's lips tightened, but he tried to feign calm. You're threatening to kill us in your own home. That might be unwise, only if you're foolish enough to refuse my hospitality, she replied. I have no qualms about disposing of intruders. They stared each other down. The parlor's fireplace crackled, adding a surreal domestic backdrop. Finally, Winslow slid the letter back into his coat. We'll give you time to reconsider, Mrs. Ashworth. We'll be at the hotel. We do hope you find reason. Then, as if some quiet signal had passed, both men turned and left. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, their boots retreating. Colton let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They're not leaving town, he said grimly. No, Marietta agreed, shoulders stiff, and they'll keep pressing until I pay or eliminate them. He glanced at her. We can't have them vanish like Harrison. 2 more men gone. That's suspicious. We need a clever approach. She nodded, already calculating. We can lure them out of Copper Run under false pretenses, then arrange an accident or lay out evidence of a so-called bandit attack. We might also bribe them, but that only invites them back. People like Winslow and Conroy know how to extort until you have nothing left. Colton set his jaw. They need a final lesson, but we must ensure no trail leads here. Marietta locked eyes with him. Precisely, this is what I kept you around for, Mr. West, to handle problems that require cold decisiveness. His chest tightened with a swirl of dread and resolve. They were about to commit orchestrated murder on men who threatened them. The diaries from her trunk had outlined her past methods, carefully staged tragedies. Now she meant to implement the same lethal strategy with him at her side. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that he was already an outlaw with a bounty far from undone. Morality had never been his strong suit, yet part of him felt unsettled. We do it carefully, he said. No innocents harmed. Agreed, she said, walking past him. I'll finalize the plan. Tomorrow we strike first. They'll regret ever stepping into Copper Run. Though her tone was resolute, Colton detected the faintest tremor in her hand as it brushed by. He realized that for all her ferocity, fear still churned inside her. Yet this arrangement had pushed them both into a corner, and cornered animals often bit the hardest. They would do what they must, or the blackmailers would devour them. As dusk settled, Marietta and Colton put their plan into motion. They would exploit the fact that Conroy had a known taste for late-night vices. A whispered tip to the local brothel's madam ensured Conroy would be lured to the outskirts after dark, where the saloons closed early on Sundays. Meanwhile, Winslow would remain at the hotel, presumably plotting a more formal push the next morning. If Conroy vanished alone, it might look like he had fled or met misfortune. Then a separate strategy could handle. Winslow Colton took position along a narrow alley that led to Clary's establishment, an after-hours den known for gambling and discreet companionship. Sure enough, Conroy showed up, cursing the boarded saloon. He stomped around, eventually heading for Clary's at the edge of town. Colton trailed him from the shadows, boots silent on the packed dirt. The building was a dimly lit home with a red lamp near the door. Conroy knocked, was led inside, and the door shut. Colton circled to a side window, checking vantage points. If he confronted Conroy inside, there was risk of bystanders, but the madam knew to clear the second floor at a certain time. Minutes later, a single lamp glowed on an upstairs window. Colton snuck in through a side entrance. The interior smelled of perfume and stale smoke. The madam hovered in the corridor, meeting him with a nod. She'd been paid handsomely by Marietta's agent earlier that afternoon. Second room, she whispered. Girls on standby to exit at your signal. He nodded. The woman slipped away, presumably to usher the girl to safety. Colton climbed the stairs, the entire building eerily quiet. At the top, one door was cracked open. A lamplight flickered. Low voices rumbled Conroy's menacing baritone, the prostitute's feigned politeness. Then she excused herself. Conroy's grunt indicated he let her go. The moment the door closed behind her, Colton stepped in. Conroy was pulling on his boots, shirt half unbuttoned. You again, he growled, eyes narrowing. Where's your precious widow? She's home, Colton said quietly, shutting the door behind him. But we don't need her for this. Anger contorted Conroy's features. You plan to kill me right here. That'll cause quite the stir. Colton lifted his revolver. No bigger stir than you blackmailing her. We gave you a chance to walk away. In a blur of motion, Conroy lunged forward. He was quicker than expected, batting the revolver aside. The shot that rang out lodged in the ceiling. Conroy drove a fist into Colton's ribs, sending him staggering. They grappled, furniture crashing. Conroy pinned Colton against a dresser, hand groping for a hidden knife. With a desperate twist, Colton freed an offhand derringer from his belt and fired point blank. The bullet thumped into Conroy's chest, halting the big man mid-lunge. A look of astonishment spread across his face as his knees buckled. He sank to the floor, struggling to speak but only managing a wet gurgle. Colton crouched, heart pounding, watching the life fade from Conroy's eyes. For a man who'd seen plenty of violence, the finality still hit him hard. He retrieved a small wad of bills from Conroy's pocket, some letters referencing Powell. The prostitute was nowhere in sight, likely hiding. The front door below remained silent. The madam would handle any noise with plausible deniability. Colton steadied himself. No going back. He rummaged through Conroy's coat to stage a simple story of robbery. A man with gambling debts shot him over a dispute, perhaps. Then he quietly slipped out the way he came. A stable boy bribed for silence had a horse waiting. Within minutes, Colton galloped into the darkness toward the Ashworth estate. Marietta was waiting in the library. He removed his hat, clothes splattered with blood. Her gaze flicked to the stains, but she asked no direct question. Instead, he handed over the letters with trembling fingers. She scanned them, seeing references to Powell's directive and collect or eliminate. Her lips pursed in grim satisfaction. One down, she said softly, "Winslow is next." Colton poured whiskey from a sideboard, downing it in one swallow to quell the nerves. "Then we root out Powell himself. He's behind these demands." Marietta nodded, tossing Conroy's letters onto the crackling fire. "Winslow will realize something is amiss by dawn. We lure him here with talk of a negotiated settlement. Then we finish it." Another accident. This time, no city street to complicate the story. As she spoke, Colton glimpsed the woman from the diaries, calculating, efficient, amoral. Yet he also felt a flicker of empathy. She wore a mask of calm, but adrenaline and fear flickered in her eyes. He set his glass down. "I'll handle it. I put a bullet in Conroy. I might as well do the same to Winslow." She hesitated, then reached to brush a smear of blood from his collar. "We handle it together. This is our arrangement, is it not?" He met her gaze. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." Thus concluded Conroy's chapter in the story. By morning, word of a violent altercation at Clary's establishment spread. The local undertaker carted out the body. A few eyebrows rose, but the brothel's staff claimed it was a personal dispute unrelated to the Ashworth name. Meanwhile, Winslow awoke at the hotel, waiting for Conroy to return, unaware that only one path remained for him, a path leading straight into Marietta's carefully laid trap. At dawn, Andrew delivered a cordial note to Winslow at the hotel, signed by Marietta Ashworth. "A matter of mutual benefit must be discussed. Please come to the estate at 9. Winslow, suspecting Conroy's absence, signaled either a successful separate negotiation or trouble, decided to attend. He armed himself discreetly, slipping a derringer into his boot and a revolver under his coat. If Conroy had run into issues, he would find out. Shortly before 9, the mansion's front door opened to him. He was shown into a sunlit breakfast room where Marietta sat apparently alone at a table set with coffee and fresh biscuits, a gentle facade of hospitality. Winslow's footsteps echoed in the hallway, and he paused to check each corner, anticipating a trap. Colton West lurked behind an adjoining door, weapon ready. "Mr. Winslow," Marietta greeted, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I regret any misunderstandings caused by our discussion yesterday. Please have some coffee." Winslow eyed her warily. "Where's Conroy?" She gave a languid shrug. "I assumed he was with you. Unless he found better amusement elsewhere last night." Winslow's brow furrowed. "We planned to meet this morning." He never showed Marietta feigned mild concern. How unfortunate. Perhaps he overslept or lost his money at cards. "Regardless, we have business to settle." "Yes." "Let's not waste the morning." Slowly, Winslow took a seat opposite her. The aroma of biscuits mingled with the underlying tension. "What did you have in mind, Mrs. Ashworth?" She poured coffee for him and herself, a compromise. "Let's say I provide a small fraction of my profits to demonstrate goodwill, enough that your associates remain satisfied. In return, you and Conroy depart. Copper run by nightfall, never to trouble me again." Winslow regarded her carefully. "So you've changed your tune. Yesterday you threatened us." She gave a wintry smile. "I realize that prolonging conflict might be bad for business. If paying a modest sum ensures peace, it may be worth it." Winslow lifted his cup but didn't drink. "I'd have expected Conroy to be part of this. He can be impulsive if he's not here to agree." How can I accept on his behalf? Marietta leaned forward. Sign a contract stating you speak for him. Once he appears, the arrangement holds for you both. If he fails to appear, that's not my concern. Winslow shifted, suspicion deepening. The room was too quiet, the quarters emptier than usual. You're certain he'll show up later? He pressed. She simply sipped her coffee. No, but time is money, Mr. Winslow. If we can finalize terms, I'll have Andrew fetch the funds, then you can go in peace. Outside the door, Colton listened to the exchange. Winslow's voice had an edge that suggested readiness to escalate. Reading Marietta's subtle cue, Colton stepped inside, revolver in hand. You won't need Conroy, he said. He had a bad night. Winslow froze, eyeing the weapon. So it's come to threats again. Colton's expression was lethal, calm. It's more than a threat. Conroy's gone. He challenged me, and he lost. A flicker of shock and anger twisted Winslow's features. You'll hang for that if I report it. Marietta set her cup down with deliberate poise. Unless we ensure you never report anything? The ruse of negotiations shattered Winslow's hand, dove toward his coat, but Colton had the advantage. He squeezed off a shot, striking Winslow's shoulder. The man cried out, knocked backward. Despite the wound, he fumbled for his gun. Marietta produced a small derringer from her sleeve, firing into Winslow's chest. The bullet's impact toppled him, blood soaking his vest. He twitched, mouth opening in a silent gasp. Colton rushed forward, kicking Winslow's revolver aside. The man's eyes were wide with terror. He tried to form words, but only managed a ragged hiss. Marietta approached, gaze steeled. You threatened me. You threatened my livelihood. This is the result. A final shudder and Winslow's body fell limp. Warm blood pooled around him, staining the imported rug. Marietta inhaled shakily, turning to Colton. We need to move quickly. Andrew is off for the day, as instructed. Mrs. Yates can be trusted to keep silent. Let's remove the body stage, a departure from town. Colton nodded, breathing hard. Adrenaline pumped in his veins. He has a horse at the hotel. We can load him in the back of your closed coach, drive out to Timber Rock and make it look like bandits got him on the trail. Under the hush of morning, they wrapped the body in an old sheet. Marietta directed the household staff to remain upstairs for cleaning duties. Within an hour, a discreet black carriage driven by the loyal groundskeeper rolled out of Copper Run. If anyone noticed, they assumed it was routine business. By midday, Winslow's corpse lay in a ravine a few miles outside town, robbed of valuables to mimic roadside violence. The bloodied rug was buried in a pit near the estate. By evening, no trace remained of the altercation. Quiet fell over the mansion. Over a simple supper, they uttered barely a word. They had dispatched 2 men in as many days, a lethal spree that, if discovered, would end their illusions of respectability. But no alarm bells rang in Copper Run. The lonely roads often claimed travelers, and local news soon spun rumors of another bandit strike. That night, Marietta brooded in her private sitting room, swirling a glass of brandy. Colton ventured in. She glanced at him, her mask of cold indifference wavering. Are we monsters, she asked, voice trembling, just enough that he caught it. He leaned against the mantel. We're survivors, he said quietly. You more than me. But there's something bigger waiting in, isn't there? Her gaze dropped to the brandy. Reginald Powell, he financed those operations years ago, including the ones with Harrison and Winslow. If he learns his men vanished, he'll come or send more. This cycle won't end until we stop him. Colton exhaled. Then we do. Face him directly. Use evidence or leverage to keep him from hunting us, or kill him if we must. Marietta nodded solemnly. Yes, after all these years, I won't let that man's shadow rule my life. They stood in the flicker of candlelight, bound by shared crimes and deeper secrets. Their marriage of convenience had become a lethal alliance. In the diaries she had once orchestrated, cunning ambushes, eliminating those who threatened her. Now she repeated that pattern in Montana. And Colton stood with her not out of naive devotion, but because they needed each other's cunning and brutality to survive. Tomorrow they would plan a journey to confront the final threat. One last piece of the puzzle remained: a trip to the city she once fled to bury her old life or break under its weight. The journey to confront Reginald Powell took them to the sprawling city of San Alonso, far beyond Montana's borders, a place where gilded mansions and muddy backstreets coexisted. For nearly 3 weeks, Marietta and Colton traveled incognito, avoiding major stage lines so as not to alert Powell. They used private wagons, rented horses, then hopped short rail segments in less scrutinized stops. Her knowledge of old smuggling routes and Colton's familiarity with clandestine movement allowed them to traverse multiple territories with minimal notice. Eventually, they arrived at a bustling metropolis far removed from the wild emptiness of Copper Run. Towering buildings lined broad avenues. Electric lamps gleamed along some boulevards while horse-drawn carriages still competed for space. Marietta guided Colton through a maze of side streets to a humble hotel well away from the central plaza. She registered them under assumed names, Mr. and Mrs. Gray, and insisted on paying extra to ensure privacy and quiet. When they reached their cramped room, she peeled off her gloves, her knuckles white from tension. Powell keeps an office in a grand building on Riverside Street, she explained, but he does his real business from a private villa in the upscale district. He's guarded by ex-soldiers, men with no scruples. Colton nodded. Then we can't barge in. We need leverage, something that forces him to negotiate. A glimmer of her old cunning appeared years ago. When I left him, I stashed documents proving his criminal dealings, ledgers, letters, and logs. They're hidden where even he wouldn't think to look. If I retrieve them, we can threaten exposure. He values his public image too much to risk scandal. Colton studied her with new respect. You planned a contingency all along. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I've lived by contingencies, Mr. West Powell taught me. That betrayal is inevitable, so I made sure I had a final gambit. She paused, eyes distant. We'll show him the evidence, demand he leave me and us alone forever. Thus began 2 days of cautious maneuvering. Under cloak of night, they visited a desolate cemetery where Marietta claimed to have hidden a sealed chest near a gravestone for a fictitious relative. With Colton standing guard, she unearthed it from beneath a false marker. The chest was small metal and rusted, yet inside the documents remained intact, sealed with wax. They retreated to the hotel and spent hours reviewing page after page sums of stolen gold shipments, accounts of hush payments, references to code names, enough to ruin Powell in any court of law or newspaper. Editorial, securing the documents in a lockbox at the local post office. They arranged a meeting with Powell, sending a note to his associates, Marietta. Ashworth requests a private audience regarding pressing matters. She holds evidence of a nature best discussed discreetly. The response arrived quickly, an invitation to his villa that evening. Hours later, a carriage whisked them through wide boulevards lined with grand estates, each hidden behind wrought iron gates and manicured hedges. In flickering lamplight, the city felt both cultured and dangerous. They reached Powell's villa, an imposing structure of marble columns and elaborate gardens. Armed guards loomed near the gates, checking them for weapons. Colton relinquished his visible revolver, aware he still had a hidden derringer strapped to his ankle. Marietta's stoic expression didn't falter as they were ushered inside. Powell awaited them in a luxurious study, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a crackling fireplace, plush rugs. He rose silver-haired, his finely tailored suit, showcasing a man who thrived on power. Marietta's posture straightened, her eyes flickering with old memories. Colton felt the tension coil in her like a spring. She introduced him as her husband, calmly explaining that they had come to resolve certain unfinished business. Powell listened politely at first, then with rising curiosity. You left me 20 years ago, Powell said, voice resonant with a faint accent. I never expected to see you again. Yet here you stand brandishing threats. Not threats, Reginald Marietta corrected, her voice steady. Simply facts. I have documents detailing your criminal empire transactions, conspiracies, murders. I offer you a choice. Let us be never send men after me again or face total exposure. Powell laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. You think I fear scandal? I own half the officials in this city, and your stage line, while successful, is hardly beyond my influence. Men like Walters Winslow. Conroy, fine, they misstep, but I can hire others, 10 times as many. Colton stepped forward, unafraid of Powell's cultivated intimidation. They misstepped into their graves, he said. That can happen to anyone, even you. A hush fell, Powell's eyes narrowed. You presume to threaten me in my own home? Marietta pressed her advantage, producing a single page from the documents. It listed the largest shipments Powell had financed, along with coded references to bribes. She slid it across the ornate desk. This page alone, published in a reputable newspaper, would ruin your public facade. Or shall I mention the federal investigators who'd love to question you about gold-laden stagecoaches, robbed on frontier trails? Powell's smirk wavered. He scanned the incriminating text. Where did you get this? Where you'd never find it. Marietta replied, there's more enough to bury you 100 times over. Silence, the fire crackled. Powell realized he was cornered, albeit by a woman he had once mentored. "You've grown more audacious than I gave you credit for," he mused, setting the paper aside. "Perhaps I underestimated you, but how do I know you won't release it anyway?" Colton answered. "We have no reason to poke a sleeping bear. If you vow to leave Marietta alone, never send men for her or me, the documents remain locked away. We vanish to our quiet life, and if I decline," Powell asked, lips curling. Marietta's gaze cut icily. "Then tomorrow, half the city's press gets a bundle of documents, along with multiple letters of testimony. You end up indicted or worse, your illusions of legitimate wealth crumble." Again a hush, then Powell heaved a resigned sigh, glancing to the door where his guards stood. Even with them, he knew a shootout would yield massive repercussions. "Fine," he said, voice clipped. "I never want to see your face again. Marietta, we have no further business. You or your husband return to your stage line. Run it as you wish. The West is large. We won't cross paths." "Swear it," she demanded. "Write your acceptance in plain words. I'll keep it insurance in case you forget." He scoffed but complied, scribbling a formal note that relinquished all claims or vendettas. Marietta added her signature. Colton witnessed it. Then they parted, each aware that any betrayal would unleash a war. As they left, Powell's black eyes burned with grudging respect and quiet loathing. Yet he let them step outside, unmolested, a testament to how much he feared public scandal. More than bullets, back at their modest hotel, Marietta sank into a chair, trembling with relief. "It's over," she whispered, voice breaking. "After all these decades, after burying so many secrets." Colton sat beside her, gently placing a hand on hers. "It's done, you're free." The lines of tension in her face softened, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. In that moment, he saw not the hardened mistress of ambush or the cunning businesswoman, but a weary soul finally unshackled. They returned to Copper Run victorious yet changed. The overshadowing threat lifted their future open like a broad horizon. Over the subsequent months and years, they quietly expanded the Ashworth stage line into new territories without fear of men like Conroy or Winslow or Powell interfering. Their marriage, still never spoken of in terms of love, evolved into genuine companionship. They dined together not from obligation, but comfort. They coordinated business decisions as equals, and the hush of conspiratorial secrets lessened. When Marietta passed away at age 84, she left behind an empire that spanned multiple states and a husband who had come as an outlaw but stayed as a partner. The townsfolk who attended her funeral remembered her as a pioneer, a powerful figure who had defied social norms to build wealth and security. Few suspected the darker threads woven through her life. Colton West quietly burned the diaries in the estate's library fireplace, ensuring no one else would question her legacy. He lived on another decade, guiding the company she built, always the watchful sentinel she had wanted at her side. On a modest headstone shared by them both, the inscription read simply, "Partners in all things." For those who whispered over the years, their union was a curiosity, a stoic widow and a younger, infamous outlaw. But for the two who lived it, it had been a union forged from necessity and tempered by survival, culminating in the sort of loyalty many claimed but rarely understood. In the end, neither the law nor their enemies had torn them apart, and in that quiet victory they found a measure of redemption. Looking back on this unforgettable journey, it's clear that fate can spin the strangest alliances into something truly meaningful. Colton West might have started out simply looking for cover from the law, but he found a partner in Marietta Ashworth, whose grit and ambition matched his own. Their shared trials, ambushes, betrayals, and long-buried secrets only served to strengthen the bond that began as a mere transaction. From harrowing shootouts to confronting old enemies, they discovered that trust and loyalty can blossom where you least expect it. In my personal view, this story reminds us that even the most desperate decisions can spark a path to redemption and genuine connection. But what do you think? Was their alliance worth the risks they took? Feel free to comment below with your thoughts or questions. We'd love to hear your perspective. And remember to keep following this channel for more stirring adventures that prove hope and resilience can be found in life's most unexpected corners.